Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
As soon as you saw the video, as soon as you heard the sounds, you knew. The sound of so many gunshots, the screams of so many concertgoers, you just knew somewhere deep down inside that the casualty count was going to be unbearable. And now, 1 week after the attack in Las Vegas, these crosses, these memorials now lining the Strip, the conversation is all about guns, gun violence, gun safety, gun rights. The National Rifle Association, those executives are all over TV now. And my next guest says the NRA has really turned gun policy issues into a culture war issue. Quote, the debate over guns has become a subset of the larger cultural clash that pits us against them, liberals versus normal Americans. Normal in quotes. Normal American Charlie Sykes joins me now. He's the author of the excellent new book, How the Right Lost Its Mind. Charlie, has the NRA turned itself into basically a far right-wing media company?
Well, first of all, good morning, Brian. Yeah, I think this is one of the key things, is that the NRA is no longer strictly about guns, gun control, and they've turned the issue from being about, whether bump stocks or this regulation or that regulation. They really have made themselves central to the culture war and tribal identity on the right. And I think this is an important thing to understand, which is why they're injecting themselves into all sorts of issues, including, the NFL players, because this has now become a key issue of cultural identity. And it's one of the reasons why the Republican Party and Donald Trump are not going to break with the NRA anytime soon.
What about the idea that in your book you present this idea that increasingly there's a lot of folks in the conservative movement who are immune to information from the mainstream media? Is that affecting the conversation this week in the wake of Las Vegas?
Yeah, we generally have segregated ourselves into these intellectual ghettos, the alternative reality silos, which I know that you've written and talked about before, and I do think that that's getting worse. All of the trajectory of the media is for us to be more divided, to pull back into our corners, to go to the safe spaces where our biases are confirmed, where our narratives are pushed, and I don't see that changing anytime soon.
I noticed on page 103 of your book here, it's an excellent new book out this week, you say, quote, what you just said there, all of this is likely going to get worse. And I found myself, I had to put the book down that moment because it gets very depressing to think that we're going to be even more siloed, even more walled off. Why are you fundamentally pessimistic about this?
Well, in part it's because, we have created this ecosystem now where, if you are a conservative, and by the way, these exist on the right as well as the left, on both sides, but we've developed almost an immunity to this. We've broken down our immunity to false information, hoaxes, and propaganda.
Immunity is a really interesting word, an immunity to false information.
Yeah, and because that was one of the shocks, I think, that I describe in the book, to realize that we had created an alternative media to tell the other side of the story, but at some point we had broken down all of the guidelines, all of the referees, and as a result of that, we have this flood of false, bogus information. And I think that one of the things that President Trump is doing, and I think he's doing it, let's be honest about it, rather effectively, by seizing the term fake news, by turning it around, what he has done is to continue to delegitimize any sort of independent voice out there, any sort of fact check, any sort of pushback. And I think that, as part of that is to immunize himself against negative stories and legitimate reporting.
Do you think President Trump is stable?
No. And I never thought that he was stable.
Remember Corker came out a little while ago and questioned the president's stability. We've seen President Trump attacking Corker on Twitter today, claiming that Corker lacks the guts for re-election. And Corker just responded on Twitter and said the White House has become an adult daycare center, and clearly I believe he's suggesting someone didn't show up for their shift to babysit the president today. Do you think this is only worsening on a daily basis, this idea that there are some Republicans like Corker who believe the president is not stable, and we see this war of words on a daily basis? It just confirms that's the case?
Well, I think what you're seeing is people willing to say what people have known for a long time. Look, Brian, anyone who's paid any attention to Donald Trump over the last 2 years should not be actually surprised by any of this. I mean, he's an erratic narcissist, a serial liar, somebody who went through a campaign, mocking women and the disabled, thin-skinned, vindictive, all of those things that we saw during the campaign that for whatever reason the conservative movement decided to embrace, enable, or rationalize. Now we're seeing it playing out in the White House. And, guys like Bob Corker, I think, have reached the point where it's like, can we, not pretend that the emperor is not naked? Can we not pretend that the emperor is not unstable in a way that we should have understood very, very clearly more than a year or 2 years ago?
Why are there then so many conservative media heavyweights willing to defend Trump at all costs, not willing to admit the stability problem?
Well, I think this goes back to the nature of the conservative media. And again, one of the surprises to me was the willingness of many people in the conservative media to roll over, to abandon long-held conservative principles and to embrace Donald Trump. Whether they did it because they were playing some sort of eight-dimensional chess like Rush Limbaugh, or whether they were doing it like Fox News because they had been plunged into it. Look, frankly, at this point, Brian, this is the business model of the conservative media. That they understand that conservatives are still behind Donald Trump. And a lot of people on the right just simply, they look at conservative media as I mentioned this before, as their safe space. They don't want to hear things that rattle their confidence in this administration. And I think that it's very, very difficult. Like, I'm a former conservative talk show host, and I try to imagine what it would be like to be doing the show now with an audience that, frankly, does not want to hear it. So I do think, there are true believers out there. There are the orange Kool-Aid drinkers out there. But there are some people who I think have just cynically made the decision that if they want the clicks, if they want the rating, if they want to be able to stay within that conservative tribe, there's only one route, and that is to be a Trump rationalizer and defender.
That's our reality right now. Charlie, thanks for being here. The great book, How the Right Lost Its Mind, goes into this in depth.